Hello again, I'm Sean Lay. Welcome to the programme which brings together BBC specialists and the foreign correspondents who live and work in the UK, filing and blogging their stories for audiences back home from the Dateline London. This week, Biden's first 100 days in the White House and why Indian judges are threatening to hang anyone obstructing oxygen supplies. Joining us to discuss that, Eunice Goesch, Portuguese journalist and academic, and the US correspondent and lawyer, Jeff McAllister. And with me in the studio, BBC presenter and foreign correspondent Clive Murray. Good to have all of you with us. Welcome back to the programme. Now, by the time Joe Biden reaches his 100th day as president next week, he'll have delivered his first State of the Union address to a joint session of Congress and met some key targets on COVID vaccination, for example, which he set himself. It was a US presidential historian looking back at Franklin Roosevelt's dynamic entry into the White House in 1933 who coined the phrase first 100 days. Well, instead of a considered assessment years later, modern presidents have to put up with the instant verdict of the commentariat. So, Jeff, I'm putting you on the spot. Instant verdict. Is there anything useful we can say about Biden's presidency at this stage?
Well, I remind the viewers that this is the one-year anniversary of Donald Trump suggesting that Clorox and ultraviolet light were going to be the solutions to COVID, just by way of trying to recalibrate now a kind of more normal person in the White House who doesn't tweet all the time and seems to be very serious. And it's almost hard for us to readjust our brains to this. In fact, he is a serious guy who has priorities that are interlinked, and he's trying to make fast progress on them. He thinks the country has underinvested in itself for a long time. It has serious racial and income disparities, and that the solution to both of these problems is to invest. And that will solve climate change, it will solve inequality and racial disparity, and put the country on a better footing. So because of COVID, he has an opportunity. People are now thinking about government differently. And he's got a $2 trillion COVID relief bill through. He's got another 2.5 infrastructure relief building bill that he's put forward, and which is going to be carved down. But, so far, Republican voters like it. Republican politicians don't. But I think there's progress to be made there. He's at 54% approval rating. Trump never broke 50. His gamble is that if he makes some progress, if he gets things done in the old-fashioned way, some of the venom will be sucked out of politics. Moderate voters will begin to think, oh, the government is actually good for something and not just something to throw bricks at. And then he won't be able to get through this very quick window of the midterm elections coming up now. Again, we have American elections, which if the Democrats lose control of the House or Senate, he'll be back to being hogtied like Obama. So he's trying to come out of the box fast. And I think so far, so good.
Eunice Goesch, if is the most powerful word as ever in these things. And the big if, which Jeff was alluding to there, is congressional cooperation. He's only just got a majority in the Senate, which means he doesn't have the kind of majority that can ultimately force things through. He's got a comfortable majority in the House. But Joe Biden is a man who likes consensus. He spent most of his career on Congress cutting deals. And he's dealing on the other side with a party that does not believe in cutting deals precisely because its own grassroots won't let it cut deals. And meanwhile, he's got a left in the Democrat Party saying, come on, Obama tried that. The Republicans weren't going to play ball. You're wasting your time. You need to be more radical, more confrontational. How is he going to balance those two demands, those two pressures?
I think it's going to be very difficult, and I think he's trying to make the most of the time and the momentum that he has and he enjoys at the moment, and he will enjoy for the next 2 years. But he is, as you said, Joe Biden is the famous Washington fixer. He knows Washington inside out, but at the same time, he's also can be quite impatient with the lack of bipartisanship that has dominated American politics, not only in the last 4 years, but for several decades. Let's not forget, the massive deadlock that Obama faced, and even before that. So it was really impossible. And I think what he's counting on, as Jeff alluded in his intervention, is counting on the popularity of the measures that he's announcing, putting money money into people's bank accounts is a very clever move. Addressing those long-standing issues that have divided America, that have contributed to, very weak economic and transport infrastructure, measures that will increase the potential of America to be a very strong trading partner. So the potential to claim a different type of, not America first, but a patriotic economic policy, is essentially trying to get public opinion on his side, and like that convince those Republicans in the Senate and the House of Representatives to vote or support some of his measures. He has showed some moderation. He has changed some of his proposals, namely on a minimum wage, and I think he's ready to compromise on the issues which he thinks that there is room. But is, I think, also very adamant, and I think it's a good image to say, well, these are things that we need to do. And so watering down these proposals will harm America. And so he knows as well that this is a window of opportunity, a very rare window of opportunity to do substantial change that America needs. And I think he's making the most of it, surprising all the skeptics about his ability to change America, including myself.
Clive Murray, let's look to more distant horizons. Biden on the international stage. We learned on Friday that he's coming to the UK. It was confirmed he's going to turn up to the G7 summit in Cornwall. He'll be hoping for a good summer. And he's also then going on to a NATO summit immediately after in Brussels. This is all in June this year. What kind of message are you trying to project? Because after all, we only had that announcement about Afghanistan where, according to General Nick Clark of the British Army, well, we didn't want that, but effectively, I mean, the implication was we were presented with a fait accompli. We're going, whether you like it or not.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because President Biden is making it clear America is back on the world stage. There's no question about that. And we've seen that in a number of key areas. This week, the climate change virtual summit, where he said America is not just going to be a bystander in this, it's going to be a leader. And we're already hearing the likes of Vladimir Putin saying that he's willing to work with the West on this issue. And President Xi now referring to climate change as a crisis, which apparently, according to Justin Rowlatt, our chief environment correspondent, is the first time he's done that. And I think part of the reasoning that the president has been able to bring around these figures has been the steel in his back that Eunice has been just talking about. You know, he's willing to say that Vladimir Putin is a killer. He agreed with that assertion in an interview with George Stephanopoulos on ABC a few days ago. He's made it clear that the buildup of troops along the border with Ukraine and Russia is completely out of order and crosses a red line. Putin has now pulled back those troops to their barracks because of the possibility of a summit with President Biden. So this sort of steel that he's putting forward is enough to make those figures in the international community who perhaps believe that America was, in their eyes, a soft touch, that
a spent force,
and those lines were flexible. That they could basically cross those lines when they felt like it. Those lines, red lines, are being marked out very, very clearly now. And I think that is a very important point. But the other point, going back to what Jeff was saying, and Eunice has mentioned this as well, 54% popularity. If you've got the public with you, that will help you in your governance, whether it's foreign policy or domestic policy. And as Jeff made clear, Donald Trump never had that for the whole of the 4 years of his time.
I just want to pick you mentioned he called out Vladimir Putin as a killer. He called out Derek Chauvin as a killer even before the trial. And there were those people who said, actually, that was a bit of a misstep. It's an incredibly sensitive issue, as Kamala Harris showed during the the nomination debates when she really went for Joe Biden over this, said, look, your record on race is not purer and pure. You were compromising with white supremacist politicians back in the early part of the 70s in Delaware over the whole issue of busing and segregation of schools. Is this area where he's going to have to tread carefully, or has that jury verdict in Minneapolis made a significant difference? Because lots of people want it to be a turning point. Plenty of people are sceptical about how much, even one case, however high profile, over the killing of George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd, as we've had a jury confirm it was, whether that will be enough to change attitudes, all the day-to-day experience for Black America?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be difficult. I mean, first of all, President Biden is white. He is not hamstrung by being a black man in the way that President Obama was in dealing with issues of race. So he can talk to those sections of society that feel that perhaps, if there is the wholesale destruction of police departments and the reorganization of police departments in certain areas, that this is not going to be something that's detrimental to them, and that in fact it benefits the rest of society if a large section of the population is lifted up in the eyes of the law. We're seeing the Justice Department go into the Minneapolis police force and do a full audit of what has been going on there. President Biden has talked tough on guns, which is a big issue within certain communities in America. I mean, there's a sense that he can be trusted. Perhaps the judge in the Derek Chauvin trial felt that he did go over the top when it comes to his comments before the jury came back with their guilty verdicts. But there's a sense that he's on the right side of the argument. And I think that is the key point here. And I think along with the 54% approval rating that he's got, as long as the economy continues to improve, which is what is happening, people will be willing to listen to him and be willing to give him the benefit of the doubt, even on something as incendiary as race.
Jeff, I want to come back on this particular question before I go to Eunice again on the Justice Department and on relationships with the courts, because in the end this is going to be important. You trained as a lawyer, you were an academic as well. Am I right in thinking you clerked at one point for a Supreme Court justice? You've done
only a district court judge. I'm afraid
district
to
court
say,
judge.
but
Forgive
I
me.
wasn't clerked.
I knew that's my fault. You've never claimed it. I misread but the point is this: you understand the American legal system all too well. You know how it interacts with the political system. We now have a Supreme Court that is majority appointed by Republican presidents, or is perceived to be Republican leaning because of the writings of the jurists before they became Supreme Court judges. How much of a handicap is that going to be for Joe Biden?
I think it's going to be possibly a significant one. I mean, the courts do not like to think of themselves as a political branch, but the way that Supreme Court justices have been nominated in recent years, especially by Republicans, has put them really on the activist side of their party. They have an agenda, and that has meant a lot of rolling back of restrictions on regulation, letting companies do more things, stopping environmental regulations, permitting religious groups to have more freedoms, more government money. It's not the kind of thing where they read the papers every day and try to push the vote for the Republicans. They did indeed, vote against Trump's ridiculous attempts to overturn the election. But I think we will see more flashpoints in cultural issues, which Biden will probably try to avoid as much as he can. The place where it may go after his agenda is, for instance, if he tries to have, say, a carbon tax or some kind of complex regulation of carbon emissions, which is part of the green economy that he's trying to go to, and the 50% cut in carbon emissions by 2035. I could see the Supreme Court finding lots of ways that these regulations are not permitted under the Commerce Clause. If he had a majority in the Senate that could actually legislate these things, where there was a clear directive in favor of them, I think the Supreme Court would have more difficulty. But now I think he's going to have to do a lot by executive action, and that's a possibility that allows the Supreme Court more leeway.
Eunice, last thought on Biden's America.
Well, I think he has surprised the world with his activism. I think he's already on course to be one of those transformational presidents in line with Roosevelt and Lyndon Johnson. And I think he's in a hurry. I think he's very well aware that his window of opportunity is very short. And so he's trying to do as much as he can. And I think he's doing it well. In a sense, he senses that public opinion is on his side, and that there is a wind of change in terms of how we approach government, the way that people see how government can do well, the state action can do well, how he wants to address racial inequalities, and even on this question that Jeff mentioned, trying to address the problems in the American Constitution that has created a very politicized judicial system, but also the deadlock in the American political system in the lack of dialogue between the presidency and Congress.
I I was very struck, Eunice, by a quote from John Boehner in his new autobiography, his memoirs. A hardline Republican in many ways, a lieutenant of Newt Gingrich back in the 1990s, one of the people who's viewed as pushing the Conservatives to the Republicans to a more conservative picture. But he described trying to lead Republicans in the House when Obama was president. He said the White House just didn't understand, the quote, what kind of clown car I was trying to drive on the Republican side of the House. I mean, it'd be interesting to see what kind of cooperation there may or may not be over the next few days. Thank you for weeks and months. Thank you all for that. Now, SOS, less than an hour's oxygen supplies. Over 700 patients admitted need immediate assistance. That social media post Friday from one of the biggest private hospital chains in India's capital, Delhi, is the starkest illustration of the COVID crisis now gripping the world's second most populous country. Makeshift funeral pyres are being used to supplement crematoria, which can't cope with the number of bodies. Two judges in Delhi's High Court Saturday threatened anyone obstructing the supply of oxygen with being hanged. Eunice, I mean, in a sense, it illustrates powerfully how emotional this has got, and it's understandably so, because it really is a matter of life and death. Patients died overnight Friday into Saturday, we're told, in Delhi, in a particular hospital, because the oxygen supply had run out. Some of them might have died anyway, certainly not all of them. What's gone wrong?
Well, I think what has gone wrong is the hubris of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. He declared in March that when we reached the end of the COVID crisis, and now we have a complete catastrophe with not enough oxygen in hospitals to provide to patients. We do not even know exact numbers, how many COVID cases there are in India, because most likely that a lot of people, especially in rural areas, are not testing. He's campaigning. There's going to be elections in India in 5 states, and the electoral campaigns go on. He campaigns without wearing a face mask. Religious festivals gathering millions of people have continued to go ahead. Cricket matches and so on. So no measures whatsoever to prevent the spreading of of this pandemic. And these are super spreading events. By any epidemiologist would say these are super spreading events and no safety measures. So it was, I think, criminal responsibility from the part of the Indian government. And it's actually the Indian people who are paying the price, because most likely the situation are going to be draconian lockdowns, are going to be violently monitored by the police, as it happened last year, and perhaps not enough done in terms of providing economic support to people that will allow them to stay at home if they are ill. And of course, the vaccine program, because Modi, India has been producing a lot of vaccines, but less than 1% of the population has been vaccinated for COVID-19.
Clive, Eunice was talking, I mean, in a sense, we were talking in the first part of the programme about political conflict, but it's downright poisonous in Indian politics, isn't it? And we had, as Eunice was saying, these big rallies. I think the Home Minister was out of action on the campaign trail for 12 of the first 18 days of April. Yeah. You've got a row yesterday between the Prime Minister and the Chief Minister in Delhi. They were having a conversation. He's going, please, Prime Minister, you've got to help. And it turns out it was supposed to be a private conversation. The central government saying, oh, you put it on the telly so that you can embarrass us. But it's not a great way to move forward.
It isn't. And Eunice mentioned the word hubris there. I mean, the critics of populist leaders like Narendra Modi, like Donald Trump, like Bolsonaro, like Orban in Hungary, is that there is a level of overconfidence, ignorance of science, and a lack of attention to detail and rigor that means that stuff gets missed. Now, a number of countries have been through exactly the same journey as India. They locked down too late, but then they locked down. We saw the numbers and infections go down. Then all of a sudden, there's a sense that it's all okay. Open up again. America did exactly the same. We did the same in the summer here in the UK with Eat Out to Help Out and all that. And we did all that without a vaccine in place. We're opening up now in the UK, but the vaccine rollout has been really quite phenomenal, globally brilliant. And as a result, opening up slowly but steadily is making sense. India opened up with no essential vaccine
Almost as if nothing had
rollout,
happened.
as if nothing had happened. As Eunice pointed out, you know, the India-England Test series, it was an amazing sporting spectacle, but it was dumb when it came to a public health analysis of what you should be doing. You know, weddings, we all love Indian weddings in a Bollywood movie, but we're seeing mass weddings in India, and as a result, we are seeing, over the next 2 weeks, potentially 500,000 people infected every single day. But the background to all this is an election. And Narendra Modi, he's way ahead in the polls, and it's highly likely that he's going to, you know, his party is going to do very well again. But the idea that he is focusing on the economy and trying to keep that doing okay in the teeth of this coronavirus pandemic, he feels that is enough to get him over the finishing line.
And it's possible he's right.
And he's probably right. The tragedy is that we're seeing pictures of mass cremations. You know, multiple people dying every day and mass graves being dug. It's a human tragedy, but politically, Modi might still come out of this smelling clean.
Just in terms of the implications internationally, though, Jeff, I mean, India was a big exporter of vaccine. The Serum Institute, the private company that produced them, we talked about them on this programme before, was producing the AstraZeneca for many countries. It was due to supply some to the European Union, to the UK, to Africa, to many other, to COVAX, of course, the scheme for poorer countries. And it actually had to default on those commitments because the government has suddenly clamped down on exports. The implications, not only if there are fewer vaccine doses available, but also if this disease is rampant again and ready to come back. We've already had cases in the UK, which is why they've now been banned travel from India. The implications internationally of a country as populous as India going into this kind of pandemic level of infection are really quite worrying, aren't they?
Yes, I mean, and of course, for India itself, this idea that there is a difference essentially between the economy and public health, in the long run, it's not true. If you don't have the public health crisis solved, the economy does suffer, even if it may be enough so far to get him over the line for this particular election. India has stored up a gigantic problem for itself. And the indivisibility of the virus, it does travel around the world. The variants get produced where there are pockets of infection or large pockets of infection, and then ricochet around the world. In the long run, this problem only gets solved if it gets solved everywhere, and it's going to be sloppy and messy and unfair because the rich countries are going to go first. But in the long run, they've got to figure out a way to get the vaccine, roll it out to all the places that need it, and that's everywhere.
The damning quote, Jeff, is this one from January. I mean, there are various quotes people have been digging up, but we not only solved our problems, this is Prime Minister Modi, but also helped the world fight the pandemic. Well, both things will now turn out to be not entirely true. Do you think he will pay any electoral price for that, though?
I don't think this time, particularly. Maybe it stores up for the next time.
Eunice, your thoughts on the long-term implications of this? I mean, Portugal, in a sense, went through something of what India is going through. Because of its links to Brazil, it was effectively cut off from the rest of Europe. Did it work?
Well, it did, though the government very recently announced the lifting of the travel ban. So now some emergency traveling or only vital traveling is allowed. So I'm not sure that Portugal on that has learned the lessons. We might not be able to go to Portugal this summer if the Brazilian variant is rampant. But I think that the lesson for all of this is we are not safe until everyone is safe. And so perhaps it would be a very goodwill gesture from the British Prime Minister to send quite a few good doses, because Britain bought far more than it needs, to India and to other countries because they're going to need it. Britain receives thousands of Indian students every year, university students. If we want to keep the United Kingdom safe and the rest of Europe safe, I think Europe and the rich world has a responsibility and to ensure that the rest of the world is vaccinated.
Clive?
The longer the longer the virus is out there, the more chance it can mutate. And as a result, the vaccines that we do have that are proving brilliant with the mutations that we have so far, they could fail. And that is the problem. That's why places like India, Brazil, they've got to get their act together.
Clive Myrie, Eunice Gurish, Jeff McAllister, thank you all very much. Thank you too for watching. Just before we go, a bit of information if you're with us in the UK. We're going to be starting our Dateline weekend a little earlier in future. From the end of this week, you'll be able to see Dateline London in the UK on Friday evenings at 7:30. Don't worry though, it'll be shown again in all the existing slots on Saturday and Sunday. And of course, any time that suits you better, day or night, you can find us on the iPlayer. Wherever in the world you're watching from now, I hope you'll join me again next weekend. From all of us, goodbye.